Hi guys, thanks so much for tuning in for today's Winter Whites Long and Low workshop. Before we get started, I'm just unpacking and setting up for class, and I'll talk you through what you should have in front of you. You should have a gold long and low vessel, a bucket of beautiful flowers, and you'll need to grab a pair of clippers or a floral knife to design with. Before we get started, though, I am going to show you how to prepare your vase because it's a little bit of an effort to get your foam soaked. As you can see here, I've got a bucket of water, or you can fill your kitchen sink to soak your foam. And the most significant thing when you are handling foam, especially if you're new to this, is to make sure that you don't push your foam down and you just naturally allow it to sink into the water. I'll show you in a second what happens when you do press foam down. So you can see I'm holding a piece of foam down under the water with my hand, which is tempting to do because you think you're speeding up the process. But in reality, you can get big air pockets in your foam, which means that your flowers are not drinking properly and they will die quickly. So I'll show you here when I cut into a brick of foam that I have held under the water what happens. And you'll see that I have big dry patches of foam, so no good. Better to just let the foam soak down to the bottom of the basin, which is the right way to prep your foam. I'm now going to take the fully soaked foam out of the bucket, and for reference, I let it soak for about 2 minutes. The video is in fast motion, so it's hard to tell. My foam, I'm now just popping into my long and low container, and I am shaving off a little bit of the excess just to make it fit nice and snug. I'm a little OCD about how I like my vases prepped, so I'm just evening out the foam, so feel free to do that if it bothers you if it's uneven. And now we are just adding a little bit of water. It's really significant to keep your long and low well hydrated, so I'd recommend adding water at least once a day to make sure your flowers are getting enough hydration and can live a nice long life. Now I'm going to reach for my tools, and I'll show you again in a little bit more detail what I'm using. I design most of the time with a floral knife, which is my primary tool that you'll see me use, but I also do love designing with clippers. And we use a brand called ARS in our studio, which we will link in the comments below if you're looking for a good pair. And now we're ready to dive into the floral design. So I'm going to start with my biggest flower first, which is my ornamental cabbage. And I'm just going to peel back some of the lower lying leaves and just leave the pretty topmost part of the bloom. I also like to flex back some of the kale leaves so it's a little bit showier. And I'm going to cut the stem down to length. I would recommend giving this stem maybe a 4 or 5 inch length. And I'm just going to pop this in one of the corners of my vase. And I'm going to work my way around and do this over and over again. I'm going to put a kale in each corner on the vase, and then I'll put a few pieces in the center of the vase as well. One of the things that I'm doing here is just kind of tracing out the overall shape of my design. I'm also giving some nice coverage. The kale is huge and works as a great base for my greenery and my flowers to nestle into. So again, just cutting the stems down to about a 4 or 5 inch length. And I always like to cut my stems at a nice angle, which makes for better water uptake. So I've got one on each corner. Now I'm just working some in towards the middle part of my design. And you can really take off any number of leaves from the top of the kale. I usually peel back maybe a third to a half of the leaves as I prep my kale. And then again, just reflexing out my leaves to make them a little bit showier and more pretty, more rose-like. And here's my last stem going in. And the kale, if you're familiar with the Helen Olivia style of design, kind of takes the place of a mini green hydrangea that we would use in most of our house style of designs. So now I've got a really nice base. We use kale in almost everything this time of year. It's just a really pretty element. Next up, we're working in some magnolia. This is from a local farmer who cuts magnolia in the Virginia countryside for us. So everyone should have a few pieces of magnolia in their bucket. And When I handle magnolia, I tend to cut my pieces in half or in thirds so they're smaller and a little bit more workable. So I'm just cutting little bits. And again, I'm sticking to about that 4 to 5 inch stem length. And if you have any loose magnolia leaves, I would not throw those away. You can just pop them straight into the foam, and they give excellent coverage. I also sometimes like to save some excess magnolia leaves and use them as an extra garnish. So maybe tuck them into a napkin fold or use them as a place card if you have gold Sharpies at home. It's a really beautiful accent for a holiday table. So just play around and add in your magnolia. This is not meant to give complete coverage. You will still see your foam after the magnolia goes in, but just laying a pretty base. And I think brown is such a beautiful complement to the white and green color palette, gives a little bit of richness. Um, so once magnolia goes in, we're going to next reach for some other winter greens. All of our holiday collection, we like to layer in a variety of different types of foliage and greenery. So we're going to spend a considerable amount of time building a base of greenery. Next up, I'm reaching for some fir. So we've got a couple different types of wintry greens. Again, just cutting it into smaller pieces. And with the fir, I like to peel back any of the pine needles that are on the stem. So I'm just inserting really nice clean stems into my foam. So this will take a little bit of time. So go at your own pace. If you feel like you're having trouble keeping up, you can always press pause as many times as you like. But again, just cutting the little pieces, stripping back any of the pine needles, and then just popping them into the foam in between the kale and the magnolia to create a really beautiful base of greenery. I am also saving some really tiny little laterals. Like you can see, that's a pretty small piece, and I'm using it just to fill in right around the vase line, plug some holes. It's important when you are greening up to not only look at it from the top down, but also to consider if there are voids or gaps in your design around the vase line. So I would recommend kind of crouching down from time to time to see a different vantage point on your arrangement to make sure you're filling from all angles and sides. Next up, I'm popping in a couple little pieces of cedar, which is more of the floppy, drapey green. This is a beautiful complement to the fir. And I like to use cedar a little bit lower down on my design so it gives some softness and some spill out of the container. So you'll notice as I work, I like to turn my vase around and look at it from both sides. So this is really significant if you're sitting at a table. You want to make sure that you have beauty from both sides and all angles. So it's important, even if you're not designing on a Lazy Susan at home, to continue to rotate your design as you go. And each time I cut a piece, I am peeling back any of the pine needles that would go into the foam. Anytime you get pine needles or greenery, either into floral foam or into a water-based arrangement, you can add bacteria into the arrangement. So the cleaner the stem, generally the happier the flowers are and the longer they live. And next up, I'm grabbing for seeded eucalyptus, which is one of our very favorite ingredients this time of year. This is more of a silvery shade of green, and it comes from the eucalyptus family. There are many different forms or presentation of eucalyptus, and this is the berried seeded version. I love, since this has a natural drape to it, to use it a little bit lower down in my design where it's kind of spilling out of the side of the container. And depending on the style you're going for, you can really have some dramatic cascade or spill. Or if you feel like you're a little bit more of a clean lines type of gal or guy, you can keep it a little bit more trim. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, so I like a little bit of drape, but nothing too crazy. And just because I say that I like to put something lower down in the arrangement or right along the vase line does not mean that I don't also blend a few pieces towards the middle section of my design. So you'll notice I am popping a few pieces of the eucalyptus more straight up and down. All right, and I think I've got one type of greenery left. Um, Oh, nope, looks like I have some more seeded eucalyptus. So I had a pretty abundant piece, so just popping in the last of that. And next up, we are going to reach for a little bit of Nandina. This is one of my favorite ingredients to add. It is light and feathery and beautiful, and it's something a lot of people grow in their backyard, so it's really easy to source locally. And I'm just going to work this in, focusing kind of out the long sides of the long and low so it creates a pretty line. Um, the Nandina this time of year is gorgeous and it does tend to antique. So you'll notice in some pieces you'll get little bits of red, very pretty for the season. The only thing to be mindful of when you handle Nandina is that it is not necessarily safe for pets if you use any type of berries. So we do not send berries out in workshop buckets, but if you see it in your yard and you're tempted because it has big, beautiful red berries and you have pets, definitely do not cut. But the foliage is fine to use. So we're going to go ahead and now transition away from greenery and over to our pine cones. I like to add pine cones at this point because they're large and they can be difficult to work in if you wait until the end. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop them in all over my design. They are picked pine cones, so someone has painstakingly glued the pine cones onto sticks, making it really easy to slide them into our long and low. I am such a huge fan of introducing brown into a white and green color palette because I think it is so rich. And if you follow social media at all, you know a Ralph Lauren Christmas is trending this year. So pine cones bring that brown that a lot of people relate to Ralph Lauren. Now we're going to be working with our roses. We have Playa Blanca roses, which are our favorite white roses. And we're going to be very careful as we handle these. We don't want to overhandle white roses, and we certainly don't want to touch the face of the rose because they can bruise. So we're just very carefully peeling back the outermost petals, which are called the guard petals. And we're going to slide them into the design. For stem length, I would recommend keeping about a 5 or a 6 inch stem length. And I am being mindful to kind of create a sloped or domed gradient as I put them in. So that means facing some roses kind of at more of a horizontal angle and facing some more straight up and down to create that really pretty face to the design. And I am going to rotate as I design. So I'll insert one on one side and then I'll spin my arrangement and insert one on the other so that I kind of evenly distribute my roses all the way around. You'll notice as I work my roses into my arrangement, I am holding them by the stem and not trying to push them in by the face of the flower because I don't want to damage my flower. So just very gently guiding my rose in by the stem. And as our vase gets fuller, if your rose is giving resistance or doesn't want to slide in where you want to put it, I would pull it out and try somewhere a half inch to the right or left. If you try to force a rose in and it's butting up against another stem, you can sometimes snap your flower in half, so definitely don't try to force anything. You'll notice with each and every rose, I'm just painstakingly taking off the outermost petals as I go, and that's where a lot of the damage from transport and growing will be seen, so definitely a little bit of an effort to peel off all the guard petals. If you are a little bit slower than the pace that I am working at, you can absolutely pause me and clean all of your roses at once and then press start again. I know that this is definitely a tedious part of the process. So just working them all in. And I'm also being mindful to add a rose into the ends of the design as well, so I don't just have all of my flowers focused on the long sides. And next up, we are going to be working with a beautiful spray rose variety called Genie. This is one of our very favorite spray roses, and spray roses can be a little bit tedious to work with because you do have a lot more guard petals to remove. So you'll see that I'm just delicately peeling away any petals that show bruising or damage. But the reward with spray roses is that you get a really nice big surface area of flower to work with, and they're very generous. If you have any laterals or pieces that are long, you can split them off to their own individual stem. So anything that is longer than 4 inches or so, you can treat it as its own stem if you just snip it off. So you can see I've added one individual spray rose bloom in. And then I'm going to treat the rest like one stem. So I'll pop them all in together. And as I spin, you can see how beautiful that pocket of spray roses is all together. So I'm going to do the same thing a couple more times since I have a few stems. Again, just putting in the legwork to get all of those guard petals off and being super delicate as I do it. This particular variety is beautiful because it's a true white. It's not a yellow-white color, but also because it has a really nice high petal count, so it almost looks like a garden rose spray rose. And that is not true of all white spray roses. There are several varieties that just really do not open to be very pretty, but this particular variety we absolutely love. So again, looking to see if I have any longer laterals that I can break off and treat as their own stem. And I had one. And spray roses are so great towards the end of a design because they really do help fill in all the nooks and crannies. It's a very forgiving ingredient in that sense. And at this point, once my spray roses go in, I really do have a full and complete design. I could just stop here and be done, but what's the fun in that? I'm gonna add all of the fun detail blooms in phase 3 of my design. So next we've got white thistle. I'm just peeling away any of the foliage from the stem. I know I'm a broken record at this point, but always take off your foliage and leaves. And I'm going to chop my thistle into a few pieces. I like to cluster my thistle blooms together, but you can certainly spread them if you like the look of the thistle spread. And I'll pick up my arrangement to show you what that looks like. And I'm going to use the rest of my thistle up, just chopping it into smaller pieces, and then I'll pop it in. This particular variety is such a beautiful greenish white, but it does also come in blue. It's very, very popular in blue as well. But thistle is a great ingredient because it is super, super long lasting. And again, it's one of those ingredients that you can use to kind of fill all the little nooks and crannies of your design. So it's great to save for the end. You can kind of correct any issues you might have at the bitter end. Next up, we've got leucadendron cones, which have such a fun jester-like pattern on them. And again, I am stripping away the leaves, and I'm just going to cut these down to size. And I will pop them in. These are also super, super long lasting. And the leucadendron cones and thistle are the type of ingredients that you really won't notice from afar at all. But once you sit at a table and are close, you'll really appreciate the detail. Next up, I am popping in some beautiful brown cymbidium orchids. And these are in little water tubes that are picked, so you can just slip them right in place wherever you like. It's kind of the perfect finishing detail for our arrangements. And last but not least, we have beautiful dried limes. I think these are so fun, and this is one of those ingredients that your guests will really be impressed by too. Everyone loves a fruit and flowers moment. So I'm going to take my green hyacinth stake that you'll find in your bag. I'm just chopping it in half, and I'm using it as a stem for my lime. And you can pop these in wherever you like. Just a fun little wintry accent. So I've got one in on one side, and then I'll pop the last one in on the other side. Now that my design is complete, I'll talk you through keeping your flowers happy and safe. I would recommend not putting them in a refrigerator because they are a little bit too cold. You could freeze your flowers, but keeping them in a cool, dark spot until you want to use them. And then adding water once a day. Just run water, put your arrangement under the kitchen sink with the water running, and that should be enough to hydrate it every day. And this is kind of a finished close-up of what you guys have made. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you all have a very happy holiday.